Welcome back to Dynasty Market Watch, where yesterday's price is not today's price. I'm Todd. I've got Matt here join with us. No Brian today. We got a little bit of switch up on how we're doing things this week. You probably got an idea of it based on the title of the episode here. We're talking 2025 Dynasty rookies, incoming guys from the NFL draft class for 2025. I mean, if your teams are like in the shitter, this is like the fun part of Dynasty. If you're doing a little rebuild, you're going to talk about some of the guys that are going to be in that first round. The idea here is basically just an introduction of these players. We're not going to do anything too in-depth. It's just going to be like, here are some of the guys we think will be in the top half of the first round, some of the guys that might be in the back half of the first round, and just kind of like a get to know on some of these guys. We're basically going to do like a little bit of a comp for who they are with maybe a comparison to an NFL player, and then where we would kind of tentatively position rank them with NFL, just to give an idea, Matt, of, like, let's say you've got a pick that you think is going to be the 103 or 104, and you're planning to trade it. What is it exactly that I'm trading? Or what is it that I'm trading for? So just to give an idea, obviously, these guys are going to shift more throughout the season. They're going to shift again in the combine. But without further ado, let's play that Fat Joe.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
All right, Matt, I'm going to let you tee us off with who I think that everybody in the Dynasty community is in agreement on. We haven't yet to say his name on this podcast. We've been referring to him as Voldemort. Hopefully everybody knows who we're talking about. If not, then maybe you just need to Google who the Dynasty rookie RB1 is going to be. Matt, lead us on.
Yeah, just to let people know who we're talking about, I will say it's Ashton Genty, the running back from Boise State. Barring an injury, I think he's going to be the 101 in most drafts. So there's always going to be a couple, outliers and things like that. But he's going to be my Dynasty RB1. Breece Hall or Bijan or maybe Gibbs would have to absolutely light the second half on fire.
They'd have to be on the CMC track.
Yeah, and I basically don't care where he lands. It doesn't matter. I think he's one of the best running back prospects that's coming out, in the last 10 years. I think he's comparable to Bijan and Gibbs as a prospect who we saw get top 12 draft capital. I think he's going to go in the top 15 picks or so. And yeah, I can't wait to roster him in a few spots. He's the most exciting rookie in this class by a wide margin, in my opinion.
Yeah, as we kind of sat in the 2024 offseason, the sentiment was that there's no elite prospect coming up in this 2025 class. Maybe there's a lot of running backs that people like, a couple of receivers that we'll get to, but not any guy that's like a Marvin Harrison Jr. There's not a Caleb Williams. There's not like that marquee guy. And I think we found him. I think his name is Voldemort. I think he's going to be that marquee guy that you now know who you're tanking for. Now, it's not great to be tanking for a running back because most likely if you're tanking, you're not really competing next year, most likely. And it's difficult to roster young running backs because all they're going to really do from the day you click draft is maybe, go down in value. But it's a great trade chip. And, if you're maybe like 1 year away or maybe you're going to kind of do like a semi-contend next year, maybe you can just roster him and move forward. But yeah, he's going to be awesome, and he's going to be the guy in this class, barring like a combine collapse, which happens. Like he could go to the combine and be like a 4-5 guy, and then okay, everybody's a little bit uneasy. That's not out of the realm of possibility. I haven't seen any like miles per hours on him yet, but all he does is blow by everybody that's on defense. Probably the one question mark is the fact that he is at Boise State. He's playing against maybe inferior competition. He did go off against Oregon. He had like over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Like he made Oregon look like children. So maybe it doesn't even matter who he's playing with and against. He is going to be the Dynasty 101 almost certainly.
Yeah, like you said, he had a good game against Oregon. And it's not like, he came out of nowhere. He turned down several very lucrative NIL deals that Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State offered. And he wanted to stay at Boise State. And, they took care of him NIL-wise. But he could have absolutely played in like the SEC or anywhere else, and I think been just fine.
Yeah, so my comp for him is Aaron Jones. like I mentioned about the speed, I'm not positive yet that he's like a 4.3s type guy, but I don't think Aaron Jones was, and Aaron Jones has been phenomenal. So I think that Aaron Jones is probably my tentative comp, not using like any sort of like data or anything, just kind of like these comps are just vibes right now. We're just vibing here in October, and we'll maybe reconvene again here in the later months. But right now, Voldemort is going to be, he'll be my rookie 101 and dynasty running back one. Probably looking at like a late second round pick, probably mid second round pick in a startup. And my comp for him would be Aaron Jones for now.
The comp that kind of popped out to me when watching him is Alvin Kamara, especially young Alvin Kamara,
Yeah.
and mainly because of the contact balance. You just see for like a kind of a smaller type guy, his contact balance is absolutely incredible. Just bounces off guys, hard to tackle, and then you pair that with the dynamic athleticism of like you said, bursting through the holes. Like every single week, he has a 50-yard touchdown. So that's who he reminds me of. And I'm not sure, as much in the past, almost like Alvin Kamara, but a better runner, but maybe not as good at in the pass game. So, but the contact balance is why the Kamara comp stood out to me.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the second guy, and to give an idea of kind of like the players that we're taking here. I've basically gone through, looked at NFL mock drafts, look at kind of like some dynasty rookie mock drafts, things like that, and I've just kind of done a consensus of players. The second guy here is Tet McMillan,
Yep.
and as excited as I am about JNT at 101, I'm probably more excited about Tet McMillan here at the second pick. I think that he will eventually kind of lock himself into 2. And my prediction is that by the time we get to rookie drafts, it's going to be, it'll be neck and neck, not neck and neck. Let's call it like a 70-30 split where there's going to be people that are like, you know what? I'm taking Tet McMillan 101. I don't really care. And they just go for it because I think he's that good. And Tet McMillan, the issue that he's probably running into from a hype standpoint is the fact that he goes to Arizona. Nobody watches him play. They're kind of irrelevant. And he doesn't have like the name pop that people have known about him for years. It's not like a Marvin Harrison Jr. situation. Well, for one, he's at Arizona, so it's not like a JSN situation where you're at Ohio State and like people just like know who you are. He's somewhat coming under the radar, and I think that the steam will just soar in the spring when we learn that this guy's like 6'5" and runs in the high 4.3s. And with that said, we've talked a lot about this guy on this podcast for now over a year. My comp for him is Nico Collins. Tet McMillan is 6'5". He's well over 200 pounds. And so the comp here that I've got, like I said, these are just vibe comps. We're just kind of vibing here. What we see, nothing set in stone. But Nico Collins is my comp for Tet McMillan for now.
The comp that stood out to me, or what I came up with, was a couple weeks ago, you had said that one of your concerns with Drake London is that he doesn't seem to have the top end athleticism of a lot of other wide receivers, but he does have that huge 6'5" frame. He's a great route runner, great hands. Tet McMillan kind of reminds me of a much more explosive Drake London, and I
thought the same thing.
And I don't really like doing that where, we have a prospect and you're like, all right, this prospect is, and then you name like an all-pro player, but he's a much better, faster, stronger. Like, I don't like doing that, but that kind of stood out to me as like, he uses his frame to like get contested catches. He's a great route runner. Some of his highlight catches are incredible, especially some of the one-handed catches he does. So that's kind of who he reminded me of. But I do agree with you. I think he's going to go like top 10 in the draft. And to me, he is, from what I've heard so far, everything I've seen and read, he is the clear-cut 102. And I would agree that he's probably closer to 101 than 103 right now.
Yeah, so like right now in the Dynasty wide receiver rankings, there's a pretty clear consensus top 6. You've got Jefferson, Chase, Neighbors. This is no order. Jefferson, Chase, Neighbors, Lamb, ARSB, and Nico. I think that really makes up like a clear tier of 6 guys. Maybe if you want to decipher like a different tier within that group, that's fine. But that's 6. And then from there, you've got like Marvin Harrison Jr., you've got AJ Brown, you've got Drake London, Puka, Brian Thomas Jr., those guys, Garrett Wilson. I think that Tet McMillan, well, maybe he's not at the top of that tier when he comes out. I think he will be somewhere in that range. Obviously, between now and then, that whole tier is going to get turned upside down. But like if we were drafting today and you were like, hey, do you want to trade any of those guys for Tet McMillan? I'd be pretty uncomfortable doing that. So maybe I say I put him at the very back of that tier. But like when you get to the next grouping of guys, that would be like Jaden Reed, DK, Devontae Smith, Rashee Rice, Chris Olave, Romadunze. I think I'm taking Tet McMillan above those guys tentatively, if that's fair.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. So on Fantasy Calc right now, wide receiver 10 through 12 is Puka, Garrett Wilson, Brian Thomas. That sounds about right to me. I think you can make an argument for one of those guys over Tet McMillan, or you can just say, hey, I'm going to take the rookie with even more upside. But like, I mean, we have no idea what Brian Thomas's upside is right now. He could be wide receiver 4 like a month from now.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay, so that's Tet McMillan. Let's move on to player 3. We haven't gotten to a quarterback yet, and we're still not. So we're going to go Luther Burden here before we hit some quarterbacks. So Luther Burden, wide receiver, Missouri. I want to say that he was maybe like the wide receiver 1 in his class coming out. I know he was very highly touted.
Yeah.
He went to Missouri, and he's I wouldn't say on the smaller end, but he's on the shorter end. He's maybe like sub 6 foot, but he's over 200 pounds. So I think he's more of a wide receiver that's a get the ball in his hands type of guy. So that kind of fits in today's NFL. So my comp for him, and I tweeted this the other day, is Jaden Reed. I think he's get him on the edge, throw him some screens, kind of like what Tampa does with Chris Godwin, things like that are just like get the ball in his hands, let him make plays. He's explosive, he's thick, and he just scores fantasy points is kind of like what's going to happen. I think you'll probably get to a point in the offseason where we'll see people that watch film and they're like, I don't like his route running. I don't like the way he does this and that. And what we're looking for is more like, what does Rashee Rice do? Rashee Rice can run a slant 14 times a game. He catches 6 of them, and then bam, he's off and running. And so
that was my other time. I saw your Jaden Reed comp and I liked it. And the only other one I came up with is like, all right, I can see this guy being used like Rashee Rice in that.
Yeah.
That seems like the most optimal usage.
Yeah.
Which I think with that type of player, you at least have to be a little cautious if he gets drafted to a dumb team. Like
there we go. You took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly where I was going next.
Yeah, you want like Tet McMillan. I think you could just drop him into a completely stupid team like Jacksonville, and he'll do fine. The Raiders, whatever. But like, ideally, Burden, you want a coach that you trust to put the ball in his hands and
quarterback
in the most optimal spots. But
totally,
I do agree with you. He seems like those seem like the clear 3 in that order so far, and I think he's going to be high up there, but lower than Tet McMillan, like by a clear tier. So like, I think you're looking at like, the Devontae Smith, Olave, Odunze, that type of range where it's like wide receiver 15 to 18-ish coming out. Because I, from everything I've read on him, I do expect him to have very good draft capital. Like nobody that I follow or talk to or follow for draft analysis has him outside the first round. Everyone seems to agree he's like a mid-first round pick.
Yeah, he could be a type of guy that just blows away the combine and he soars even more. So, yeah, I think you make a great point. Like, I want him on a team with a smart offensive coach and a quarterback that is willing to put the ball in his hands and just let him make plays. So, whatever team that is, that'll be a major key for him in dynasty rookie drafts. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Kind of in that Jaden Reed, DK, Devontae Smith, Rashee Rice, Chris Olave range, somewhere in there. And the draft capital and the landing spot will probably impact that kind of within the range of somewhere between wide receiver 13 and early 20s. All right, so let's move on to the quarterbacks. And I think the way we've talked about what we're going to do here is we're just going to clump all these QBs together and just say, I think there's like 3 of them that are probably going to go in the first round-ish. I mean, who knows between now and then? But let's assume that like Shadur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward, at least 2 of them, maybe 3 of them go in the first round. You could throw out Carson Beck and just say like 3 quarterbacks go in the first round. And if a quarterback, if any of these quarterbacks go in the first round, that probably means that they are worth drafting in the first round of a dynasty rookie draft. So if you're kind of taking notes at home of like how many good picks there are in the first round of my upcoming 2025 rookie draft, we had 3 like super studs, and then let's call it like 3 quarterbacks. So between Matt, like Shadur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't really know much about any of them. I mean, I've heard of Shadur Sanders. I mean, I know a little bit, but like outside of like name and watching them on Saturdays every now and then, I don't know too much. I'll just be quite frank. But are any of those 3? Do you see them like catching storm and getting some hype in dynasty circles for rookie drafts in 2025?
Yeah, so Cam Ward and Jalen Milroe, they both run. So that's going to make them appealing. With that comes some questions about, the typical questions that are associated with running quarterbacks, their processing, their accuracy, their ability to make progressions over the middle of the field, etc. But I do think Ward and Milroe have a very good chance to get the draft capital required to instantly jump into that like top 10, top 12, top 14 QB conversation. Shadur Sanders is someone that I keep seeing, like, by people I respect, talked about as one of the best quarterbacks in this draft, as like a top 5 real life pick. I've watched enough of him this year. I just don't fucking see it. I don't think he's a good quarterback. He does some things well. He has good accuracy. His numbers behind a clean pocket are very good. If he gets the ball off, he's generally pretty good at, with accuracy, ball placement, etc. He's good at going through his progressions. But you watch his throws, he has like almost no velocity on his passes. So in that sense, I've heard him comp to Teddy Bridgewater a little bit, and I can kind of see that. But another glaring issue he has as a prospect is he takes a ton of sacks. And it's not just that he plays behind a bad offensive line, but he's at fault for a lot of those sacks. And if you watch some of his highlights, he definitely has some Will Levis to his game where like, it's like, why aren't you throwing this ball away? As he's like getting spun into a sack and he's throwing it right in front of a cornerback who can almost walk into the end zone, that type of shit. So his decision making. And then the last thing I'm going to say, because this does kind of bother me and it might not matter, but Shadur Sanders is a total immature fucking asshole. And I don't think that usually portends well to playing quarterback in the NFL. And there's been multiple times where he throws his teammates under the bus publicly after the game, talking about, watch the tape. You see what the offensive line did? Okay, what did you expect me to do? There was like that tweet that he had this summer where one of the players transferred from Colorado to a different college, and Shadur quote tweeted that and was like, bro must be mid as fuck. I've never heard of him, after playing a whole season with him. And it's like that type of shit is not going to go well in these combine interviews with teams. He's going to have to answer for that. And to me, the quarterback position is hard enough to play in the NFL. You really want to have someone with a strong, like, emotional IQ, mental IQ for the game, the maturity to handle the adversity that's going to come with transition into the NFL. And that type of stuff just seems like a huge red flag to me.
Yeah.
Aside from his limitations with his game.
Yeah, so I won't sit here and try to pretend like I've watched a bunch of him and know what's going on. I mean, I've seen like, highlights and stuff like that and watched some portions of games. But what I can speak to is how the dynasty hype train works and what will likely happen to draft once they get draft capital. And so what my prediction is, so right now, if you're looking at fantasy calc, Drake May is kind of a good baseline of, all right, rookie quarterback and where he's at. He's right now QB 17. We've only seen one game. There's not really enough time for anything to go crazy with him. So he's QB 17. QB 18 is Trevor Lawrence. QB 19 is Bo Nix. QB 20 is JJ McCarthy. These guys, if any of them or a few of them get top 5, let's maybe even call it top 10 draft capital, I think that they will likely go into that type of range. So like QB 18 to 22, call it. So 21 is Tua, 22 is Justin Fields, 23 is Michael Penix. I think that any of them go top 10, they're probably ahead of Penix. So you're looking like QB 20-ish. And that puts you into a range of, gosh, what is that? Like round 5 in a startup, maybe? Does that sound about right for those guys?
Yeah.
Maybe around 4 if you're up to the Drake May range in QB 17. So, yeah, I think that there's going to be just a ton of differentiation between where you get picked and where you go. So, like if you think about the teams that need a quarterback, there's these 3 guys, maybe also Carson Beck. If you're going in the top 10.
Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers are the 2 other guys that I've heard talked about. They could get mid first step. So it's probably between 2 and 5 of these, the 3 we mentioned, and maybe Ewers and Beck. I mean, teams always kind of find reasons to push flawed quarterbacks up their draft board the closer we get to April.
Exactly. So the teams that kind of need a quarterback per se, and this maybe not be a conclusive list, but you're looking at the Raiders will probably draft a quarterback.
Your team?
Yeah, the Titans will probably draft a quarterback. And then after that, I mean, you could make a case for the Steelers, but they're 4-2. They're going to be probably in the back half of the first round. Maybe they get rid of Russ or Fields and then draft one. So then you have another dual quarterback system again. After that, there's really not a team that is looking to take a quarterback in the top half of round 1.
I think Carolina has a good chance of doing it.
Oh, Carolina. Sure. Carolina. I didn't even go to the NFC. So if I'm kind of running through the NFC East, maybe the Giants.
So the Giants. And then who knows? But the Browns need a quarterback.
The Browns need. They could definitely take one.
Yeah.
You could also argue that they're like so stuck to Deshaun Watson that they end up taking like an O-lineman or a receiver. But yeah, they could definitely be on the list. Yeah, the Saints could be on the list. After that, here's one that could be interesting. Geno Smith doesn't have maybe 1 year left on his contract. That could be one where if they finish the year like a little below 500, they've obviously been struggling. They started 2-0. They're 1-2 since then. Maybe they finish under 500 and they draft his replacement for the future. That could be a possibility. I could see that one. I could see that one being like a Cam Ward drafted at like pick 14. And they roll a Geno for another year or 2, and then eventually they turn it over to Cam Ward. I don't know. I think we're starting to see some of things like that. But I think there's a decent list of teams that do need a quarterback. And so I think probably at least 3, maybe 4 of these guys go first round. And like you said, these teams always find a reason to draft a quarterback. So we'll run into that too.
Yeah, I mean, like last year, on the night of the first round of the NFL draft, nobody really had Penix and Nix, even in the first round.
Yeah.
Like some people had them sneaking in at the end of the first round. Basically nobody had them as top 12 picks.
Yep.
So, I mean, we could see a similar thing happen again this upcoming season.
For sure. All right, so let's move on. So, let's just call this player 7. If you're keeping track of kind of how many players are worthwhile in this rookie draft. So player 7, I think, is a still very worthwhile player, and that's Quinshon Judkins. Probably coming into the season, or at least at the end of last season, Judkins was the RB1 of this class. I don't know that he was on the level of where we have Janty now, but he was definitely trending towards the running back 1. And then he transfers from Ole Miss to Ohio State, which was just a bizarre move. I read at one point that Ole Miss kind of just ran him out of town. that Jackson Dart was complaining about him not playing hard, something to that effect. And they basically said, you know what, we're kind of tired of this guy. And then he decides to go to Ohio State, who has one of the guys that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, Travion Henderson. Very weird decision to go there. Not really sure what's going on with him. I don't want to like throw his name under the bus, so I'm gonna tread lightly here. But from what I've heard to this point, a little bit concerned about what might occur in the at the combine meetings with organizations. So he's just one that we could potentially see slide. I'm not going to say that I'm going to maybe value this stuff, but maybe the NFL teams do, and we could see him slide if this is everything we've heard is accurate.
Yeah, and the only thing I really know about him is, from a profile standpoint, is from what I understand, he's not much of a pass catcher. He is a very, very good rusher. So that would be like the main differentiator between him and Travion Henderson. Is Henderson's a little bit better at catching the ball. Profiles more of as a receiving back or hybrid back, and Judkins is most likely looking at like a very good 2-down role, and then maybe possibly being taken off the field on 3rd downs, long down and distance, those type of situations. But a lot of people, from what I understand, have him and Henderson ranked pretty closely. They did last year. They still do again this year. And yeah, they both seem like they're going to get good draft capital, whether that's late 1st round, probably 2nd round. I've heard some of the same things you did about his time at Ole Miss. For now, I'm not going to put much stock into it.
We'll just wait and see what happened.
Yeah,
I agree. So my comp for him, I'll use 2 comps. I'll cheat here, and I'll say my 2 comps for him are Najee Harris and then Brian Robinson. So both kind of bigger backs. I agree with you that the receiving hasn't been great for Judkins to this point, but like we've seen with Ken Walker now, I think it's kind of ends up being a little bit of a coaching decision, and maybe they're not seeing things from him in college, or maybe the coaches in the NFL decide that he's good and they like to throw to him later. I don't know. But anyways, for now, I'll just say like Najee, Brian Robinson. And I will say one thing about kind of like the build of him. I want to have one of 2 things with a running back. I either want a guy that is just absolutely so fast that nobody can catch him, so like an Achane, or I want like a guy over 6 feet, like a Brian Robinson, that guys can't really bring down. And give me like one of those 2 things. I don't want him to be a plotter, slow, but like Brian Robinson runs a 4.53. That's fine, and he's a big guy. So yeah, I think one of those 2 things. You either need to be fast as lightning, so hopefully that's what Janty is, or you need to be a little bit bigger. Those are like my 2 options of a running back. Don't get like a guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit is Travion Henderson. He concerns me a little bit because he's not that big or not that large, and I'm not sure how fast he is. We maybe talk about that in a minute, but Judkins is bigger, so I do like that.
Yeah, I know he's bigger. I thought, and I'm by no means any kind of draft expert or anything. I thought what I heard was there's no kind of speed issue with Judkins or Henderson. I thought I've heard that they were expected to run fast.
Right, but what I'm saying is, I agree. I think they're both potentially like in the 4.4s. What I'm saying is I either want like a guy that runs in like the 4.3s or a bigger guy. And then if you can have like a bigger guy running in like the high 4.4s, it's great.
Yeah.
Obviously we want like a talented player. That kind of goes unsaid, but but those are kind of just as far as a size, speed, makeup. I do not want a short, small, slow guy. That's kind of like the thing I would like to stay away from.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right, so we did just kind of mention Travion Henderson. Let's go ahead and throw him out here. And if there's a theme here, there's good running backs in this class. So if you're needing a running back, this is the class for it. And I think you're probably, if you just Google dynasty rookie drafts, you're probably going to run into a lot of people talking about how this class in particular is probably going to kind of reset the running back frame in the NFL. You're seeing a lot of older guys like Mixon, Kamara, where we're kind of flushing out the old guys and we're kind of bringing in a new wave. And this is kind of that new wave from that 2017 running back class that we saw several years ago. So Trayvon Henderson, we kind of just talked about him. I think he's a little bit on the shorter side of like 5'10". And I think the hope here would be that he is a guy that runs in like the low 4.4s. So that'll be the question mark that I have with him. As far as like where I would have him in running back rankings, it's probably somewhere he's going to open up somewhere in the high teens, assuming he can get like second round draft capital. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we need to point out is we're looking at needing second round draft capital or first round for most of these guys to justify being in the top 20. After that, like you get into third round, you're probably looking at like outside of the RB2 range to justify a ranking that high, given the third or fourth round draft capital.
Yeah, and if you look on Fantasy Calc right now, the running back 5 through running back 9 is Kyron Williams, Ken Walker, Jonathan Taylor, CMC at running back 8, and then Achane at running back 9. I would expect if these guys get good draft capital, we'll say top 60 or top 2 rounds. I think any of these running backs have a good potential to fall right at the end of that tier or in that tier, even if it's a good landing spot, even, towards the top of it. But that's what I'm thinking. And then you have like, Derrick Henry's his own thing at running back 10 right now. And then you have like James Cook, running back 11. So I think right in that range is where you're looking at a lot of these like mid to late first round running backs.
Yeah.
That we're talking about. And the other thing I wanted to mention with Henderson, a kind of a good disclaimer for all these guys that we're talking about. Everyone was certain TreVeyon Henderson was going to declare at this time last year.
Yeah.
And there was a couple other guys like his teammate, Mecca Egbuka, wide receiver, we'll probably talk about here in a minute, from Ohio State. And then Raheem Sanders, who played at running back who played at Arkansas, who transferred to South Carolina. He was also another guy that was supposed to declare. All 3 of them were supposed to declare last year, went back to school. NIL is kind of changing the landscape in that regard, and they can make money and improve their draft stock, hopefully. So it's very possible a guy that we have slotted even pretty high right now could end up not declaring for the draft. So it is kind of like a new landscape in that regard.
Yeah, and so the other running back that we can just kind of throw out there, we don't need to go deep into, is Amarion Hampton. And if Ashton Janty wasn't doing what he's doing, maybe we're talking about Hampton, because he's already at 900 yards on the season, 7 touchdowns. Like, he's been a stud. He's kind of like the build that I prefer, of being like 6 feet, and I don't know how fast he is, but so I'm kind of glossing over him, but he seems to be another one, like, go in the second round, bam, you're a top 12 RB.
He's one of the guys that, to me, just as someone who kind of casually follows these prospects for Dynasty, like going into a college football season, I want to have a good idea of who the top 10 to 15 prospects are. I didn't hear much about him in August, and like every week you're hearing more and more about him, especially in real life mock drafts, etc. So he definitely seems to be a guy on the rise right now.
Yeah, go check out his game logs. They're pretty filthy. All right, so let's get away from the running backs. Running back is somewhat similar to quarterback, given that we're really looking for draft capital. There's some landing spot play into it. And then obviously we want to draft good players as well. But so now let's move on to a guy that I think everybody has heard of. And there's big question marks on what position he's actually going to play. So Travis Hunter, does he play receiver? Does he play corner? It seems like he's trending more towards a corner. He says he wants to play on both sides of the ball. If he plays on both sides of the ball, he's probably going to end up being a little overrated for fantasy, because I question how many snaps he gets. But let's say he does.
I hope he does, though.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. So my comp for him, if he were to just play wide receiver, I'm kind of giving high praise here, is Garrett Wilson, because I think that this guy's stop ability and obviously just sheer speed is super elite, like Garrett Wilson. And so, yeah, that's my comp for him. I think if he was just going to play wide receiver, he'd be somewhere in the top 12 to 15, like we mentioned with like Ted McMillan and Luther Burden. But the question mark is, does he play a full allotment of snaps on the offensive side of the ball? I'm pretty skeptical that happens because people think that he can come in and just be like a generational corner, and they don't really want to take that opportunity away from him. So I don't know. He's kind of a weird one. He probably gets overdrafted a little bit in rookie drafts. So I question how much I'll get of him unless he goes somewhere that make a commitment early on. Hey, he's playing both sides of the ball. He's playing a full allotment of snaps. We're making a point to make him an offensive threat for our team.
Yeah, I think you almost have to hear some kind of assurances like that, unless you just really have him like a clear tier or two ahead of the other prospects that you're looking to draft next year. I am going to be fascinated to see how that all plays out because it just kind of would be funny, right? If he declares as a wide receiver, someone takes a lot of people are taking him in the top 5, and then like come training camp, they just switch him to corner. I mean, that would suck if you drafted him, but just from an outsider perspective, if you're not too overweight on him market wise, that would just be funny, and it is something that you have to kind of be aware of going into it. Though, who he kind of reminds me of, and I don't know if this could just be like a stupid comp, but based on what I've seen of him, like imagine if Tyreek Hill was just fast and not like elite level fast, where like some of the things, one of the underrated parts of Tyreek's game, I think, is his ball skills, especially in contested catch situations where he's kind of a smaller guy, but he plays really physical and he goes up and like meets the defenders at the catch point. And I see a lot of that with Travis Hunter. And I think that's one of the reasons he's such a good defensive back too, is like his ball skills are like top tier. So I kind of see some of that with like the yak ability and like the catch point strength in his game, but he is kind of a hard one for me to find a comp for.
Yeah, we'll probably have to gather more information before we really know what to do with Travis Hunter. So that's basically 10 guys that we're through at this point. I'll just run through them again. Ashton Janty, Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, Shadur Sanders, Jalen Milrow, Cam Ward, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, Omarion Hampton, Travis Hunter, and then maybe Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck as well. So maybe let's call it 3 of 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. So that's through 10 players. The next guy up here is Emeka Egbuka, and he was I want to say maybe a number 1 overall wide receiver coming out in his class. He's a senior. People going into the 2023 season thought he was a for sure player to come out after his junior year. He had a pretty lackluster junior season, falling to the wayside behind Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he had a lot of injuries going on last year, but this year he's now playing with Jeremiah Smith, and Emeka Egbuka has come alive in his senior season, and he's 6 foot over 200, 6'1" over 200 pounds. And he's having a really good year, and he's playing alongside, I mean, arguably what will go down as the greatest wide receiver prospect in the history of college football with Jeremiah Smith. I'm not kidding. So he and Jeremiah Smith are kind of neck and neck. So if you're looking at it, you're like, oh my gosh, why is he tied with a freshman receiver? Well, it's because Jeremiah Smith's that dude. But Emeka Egbuka has had a really good campaign, and I think he's kind of back into that first round NFL draft range for this upcoming season.
A comp I've heard about his play style is that he works from the slot a lot. He does not work outside primarily. So I have heard him compared to both JSN and Amon-Ra St. Brown in terms of like the spectrum of what you're looking for when he transitions to the NFL, which kind of makes sense when I watch him. He does seem to be a little bit better after the catch than those guys, but that could just be at the college level where he's getting open at a much greater clip than he's maybe going to be in the NFL. But that type of guy where ideally he's paired with, well, maybe not ideally, but if he's paired with an elite outside wide receiver, that doesn't necessarily hurt him. It could actually help him at the NFL level. So everything I've read about him, he is kind of like in that mid to late first round in real life. So he's going to be, I don't know where that ends up falling. A lot of that's going to be maybe spot dependent. But if he gets drafted around 20th overall in real life, he's probably going to be in that, wide receiver 20 to 30 range in Dynasty.
Yeah, so I'll give a comp here. My comp will be Robert Woods.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
kind
so
of
that
like,
fits too.
yeah, so kind of in that slot build. Like he's a thicker guy. He's not short. He's 6 foot, 6'1". So like,
Yeah.
but I think Robert Woods is a pretty good comp for him. If you want to go like ceiling comp, you could go Chris Godwin. I'm not going to bet on that one. I'm kind of looking through my database here of players from college that went in the first, second round. So, but I think Robert Woods probably fits the bill best for him in that slot type player. I think probably what everybody wants to do is throw slot and say Jarvis Landry for every slot player that comes out. I think Egbuka, I think is actually pretty athletic. I think he's pretty fast. And that was kind of one of the reasons that he was ranked so highly coming out of high school. So, I mean, he was ranked ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. coming out of high school. And honestly, his sophomore year, bear with me here. I'm going to try to pull up his college stats. But if I remember correctly, his sophomore year was really good. And yeah, he had over 1,100 yards as a sophomore. And that was he was pretty much neck and neck with Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. finished with 1,260, 14 touchdowns. Egbuka, 1,150, 10 touchdowns. So, and also Egbuka had 11 carries, 87 yards, and 2 touchdowns, which is kind of nice to see. So if you want to just if I just want to keep stealing the Jaden Reed comp, I could go with that one again. So I think that Egbuka kind of fits today's NFL especially from a fantasy perspective. And so I'm pretty excited about Egbuka. I'm gonna hopefully just throw his junior season out the window with all the injuries and be pretty optimistic about, if I get to draft Egbuka at the very end of the first or maybe like the beginning of a second round, that's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that completely.
Right.
Let's go to. Do you want to do the rest of the receivers or the tight ends?
Let's do one more player. Let's go. So this would be what, player 11 or 12. So let's go Colston Loveland. I guess this would be player 12. Let's go Colston Loveland. I'm going to be honest. I don't really know much about Colston Loveland except for I know he's a tight end and he plays for Michigan. And people seem to like him. That's about all I got for Colston Loveland, and that's about all I need to hear from a tight end. So if you're pretty good, you're putting up pretty solid numbers. Like last year, he had 650 yards on a national championship team. This year, not as great. He's got 260 yards through 5 games, but that offense is not very good. He's got 260 yards. The next closest guy on the team has 78 yards. So he's eating a lot. He's got 260 of their 690 total passing yards. So he's pretty much the whole passing offense, to be quite frank. And so I think he's probably going to just jump right in, assuming he gets the draft capital in the first or second round. And it sounds like it'll probably be the first round as of now, and be a top 5 tight end right out the gate.
Yeah, the only kind of concerns that I have with him is I've seen him. I've heard that blocking is a big part of his profile. So in that sense, he's kind of similar to top tight end prospects like Freiermuth and Michael Mayer, and less like Sam Laporta, which could end up being a concern in Dynasty. And the other tight end so Loveland is definitely the top tight end from everything I've heard. One guy that's gaining a lot of steam recently, who is more of a receiving tight end, is Tyler Warren from Penn State. Last week he had 17 catches in a game, which is kind of nuts. I think it was a FBS record for tight ends. So he's one that if he creeps up and gets top 50 draft capital, he could enter that like late 1 conversation in rookie drafts too. He's one to keep your eye on.
Yeah.
And then, there's like that Gadsden guy from Syracuse. Any other tight ends, I don't think we need to really get into. But Tyler Warren, I would mention as someone to keep your eye on outside of Loveland. And they seem to have kind of contrasting play types, basically, from what I've seen.
Yeah, but like Loveland's listed at 6'5", 250-ish. Warren's listed at 6'6", 250. And it's nice to see some of those taller tight ends, because I think we've gone through a stretch here of highly touted tight ends like Kincaid, Laporta, that are on like the 6'3", 6'4" side of things, which is not as great for the position, to be quite honest. We're looking more for like 6'5", 6'6". So that is nice to see that we've got maybe some guys that are coming in that are a little bit taller. I think one thing that people look at with tight end, especially, is the RAS score, so RAS score. And that basically just tells us how athletic and what their profile is from an athleticism size standpoint. And
Yeah.
so that'll be the biggest thing for them aside from draft capital. But it does seem like we're going to add 2 more tight ends, at least the top 12 for tight ends. So that position as a whole is getting weak on the top end outside, I guess, outside of like McBride, Bowers. We really like those guys, but they're not like producing like Kelsey was for all those years. So the position is maybe getting deeper, but weaker. Does that make sense? Of like, I got a fly in my face. So I think we're getting some guys that we like. We've gotten guys like Kincaid and Laporta. Now we've got Tucker Kraft, but we're not getting that dominant performance week in and week out. So adding a couple more of these guys, I will enjoy drafting them with the hope that maybe I turn one of these into a McBride or Bowers type player.
Yeah, I mean that's all you're hoping for. I don't think Bowers is going to be touched for a long time. I think he's going to hold that tight end one crown for a long time. But outside of that, yeah, they should add a couple to the top 10, 12, 14, like you said. There's some other guys that you want to be aware of in terms of Evan Stewart, wide receiver from Oregon, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Texas, who has a lot of similarities to Xavier Worthy. Supposedly he could challenge Worthy's combine record. He's that fast. But, we see with Worthy and a lot of his predecessors that run that fast, they have a lot of flaws in their game. So I don't know if we need to dive deep into anyone else, but like, what are your overall thoughts on like the 14, 15 guys we've covered so far?
Yeah.
Like, how do you view this class?
Yeah, I'm becoming more optimistic about the back half. And it's really all because of the quarterbacks. As we came into the year, we basically didn't have a quarterback. And now we've got maybe 2, 3, 4 that are going to get drafted in the first round. And while I'm maybe not very excited about those guys, I know that people will in general. And that should be able to push down guys like Judkins, Travion Henderson, Egbuka, Loveland, push those guys down into the back half of the first or into the early second. Whereas before it was like, we got to draft these guys at like the 4, 5, 6, 7. Don't love that. With that said, the top 3 guys of this class, I love these 3 guys. Like if you're getting a top 3 pick, I do like Janty. I'm probably not quite as high on him as everybody is. He is obviously awesome, but I'm probably not quite at the level of everybody else. But those 3 together, Ted McMillan especially, I comped him to Nico Collins. I am thrilled to jump in on any of those 3 guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the exact same way. I love the 3 guys. The rest of the class, I'm kind of hot and cold with the rest of the class, but the point you just made, I think, is important. This class is looking deeper than it was 6 weeks ago, and I expect that to kind of continue. And I'm going to be a little less cavalier than maybe I would have been a month or 2 ago about trading away my contending first. Like, do I really need this player that I'm trading it away for? Because even if I decide I'm out on a prospect, like I said earlier, I do not like Shedeur Sanders. I don't expect to roster a lot of him, but it's looking like he's going to be worth a lot come rookie draft time. So you kind of want to be, I think you want to be a little careful if you're a contender and you're trying to throw that first round for whatever win now help you're going to get this season.
Yeah, and my last comment would be, if you are tanking, I'll just say for myself, when I'm tanking for this season, there's a lot of teams that are doing everything they can to get to the 101 so they can take Ashton Janty. That's great. If I can get to the 101, obviously I would prefer to do that. If it means that I have to absolutely debilitate my roster to do it, I'm perfectly fine just saying, you know what, let you have the 101. I'll take the 102 or 103 and be really happy about getting Ted McMillan or Luther Burden. There's other running backs in this class. Maybe I can trade into like the back end of the first round. Maybe I have a pick in the back end of the first round and I can take a Travion Henderson or Omarion Hampton. I'm okay with that because I will say one thing about this class, the receivers are very weak. After Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, As of now, it's basically Egbuka. There's obviously going to be guys that are going to come out of nowhere. There's going to be guys that we don't like at the rookie draft, and then all of a sudden they're awesome. But as we sit today, it's basically Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, and then hopefully Egbuka continues the path that he's on. So if I'm tanking, get a top 3. If it's not 101, I'm not that upset about it.
Yeah, same page. And that the other thing that we kind of covered when we talked about the QBs is outside the top 3 that we expect to be very valuable, we really just need one of Cam Ward or Jalen Milroe to get draft capital. Let's say top 15 draft capital in real life. And then from there, you can make the decision on if you want to ride the roller coaster with the latest, top rushing quarterback prospect. But because of their dual threat ability, they're going to be ranked very highly in Dynasty. So we just need one of them too. And then it becomes like 4 real blue chip prospects instead of 3.
All right. Sounds good. This was fun. We're going to probably do this again maybe in the next month or so. You can find Matt on Twitter at Dynasty Peasant. You can find me at Dynasty SFlex. Thanks for joining.